Good morning. It is good to see each and every one of you this morning. If you will, take your Bibles and turn to Hebrews chapter 2. We'll begin our study there in Hebrews chapter 2 in just a few moments. We have some that are visiting with us this morning. I want you to know that you are honored guests and that you are welcome to worship here with us at Pleasant Grove each and every opportunity that you may have. It is so good to be with each and every one of you this morning. As we were coming in this morning, we saw a lot of traffic, and it just seemed like this morning an exuberant amount of people in coats and ties and dressed up like they were heading to worship services, much more so than normal, and which is always kind of warming to see that people are trying to put the Lord first in their lives. It's a beautiful day. They could be doing other things, but as well as you. But we are here to worship with the Lord with one another, and that is so encouraging, and it's what we ought to be doing. I want you to think back to last week's sermon for just a minute. You may not even remember what it was about. Hopefully you do. Maybe you can look in your notebook or where you took notes. But we talked about prayer last week. And, I kind of thought about that some this week. And on Mondays, I try to sit down and review my sermon before and go back and make some notes to kind of help me if I ever need to use it again, or even make some notes of another sermon that I might want to do later. And so I was making some notes and just kind of looking back through it, and some thoughts came to mind, and I had some thoughts already scratched out on some paper. And I heard someone make a statement on Monday that they're going through some hard times in their life. It's a coworker, and their mom has just passed away. This person has been dealing with some after effects of having COVID twice. They have lost contact with one of their children. Just so many things that are going on in their life, and just so negative, and it's made them become negative in their outlook on life, and even in their job. They're just negative. And this lady made this statement this week: "I just don't think anybody understands. Nobody gets it." And I just paused for a minute and thought and said, no, there are people that understand. And that just got me to thinking about, and I was already thinking about prayer, and I'll share our topic with you in just a moment. But that just got me to thinking about the privilege that we have, not only in prayer, but to whom we pray and who intercedes for us. So I want you to think for just a moment, and we touched on this briefly last Sunday morning, but do we ever really think about how much Christ dealt with here on earth? Not just thinking about the crucifixion and all the physical aspects of that, but just living here on earth. Living as a man, coming from deity to being born as a man, in all the things in which that we deal with. Do we ever just really sit down and think about what Christ dealt with? Do we have confidence that Christ understands what we deal with on this earth? If we do, that should give us comfort in our times of sorrow, in times of pain, sadness, hurt, loss, happiness, and whatever else you can think of. But I think that the Bible is very, very clear when it comes to those things. And that brings us to our thought for this morning. Coming from Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 14, this is coming from the New King James Version here. It says, in the middle of the verse there in 2:14, it says, he shared in the same. When we start thinking about Christ, and there are many, many things, and I thought about this a lot this past week. There are so many things that I would love to know about Christ's life that we don't have recorded for us in the Scriptures. We have what we need, but I would just like to know sometimes, what did he eat? You know, when he was working, what did he do? You know, just as much as I could know. But we know that in Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 14, that he shared in the same. If you turn to Hebrews chapter 2, we'll look at verses 14 through 18. Again, this is coming from the New King James Version. I typically use the English Standard, and we'll swap to that once we start looking at some other passages. But in Hebrews chapter 2, beginning in verse 14, it says, "Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. For indeed, he does not give aid to angels, but he does give aid to the seed of Abraham. Therefore, in all things he had to be made like his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For in that he himself has suffered, being tempted, he is able to aid those who are tempted." Christ can aid us. He has shared in the same things in which we as people have experienced. And that should give us a comfort. That should give us a peace. But I think oftentimes we forget. We become self-centered. We become so much of dealing on the problem at hand, we forget that we have, as the verse says, an aid. An aid to help us. I want us to look at a few other translations and see what they say. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14, we looked at the New King James Version there. It says, he shared in the same. The New American Standard Bible, the 1995 version, says, he himself likewise also partook of the same. He partook of the same things. The American Standard Version says he himself also in like manner partook of the same. In the same manner, in the same way, in the like manner. The New English Translation says he likewise shared in their humanity. Shared in their humanity. Being human. He shared in that with us. The English Standard Version, he himself likewise partook of the same things. And the Holman Christian Standard Bible says, Jesus also shared in these. I hope that this gives us a little bit better understanding. They're similar, but sometimes a little bit different wording helps us understand, especially when it says something like he shared in their humanity, in the things that we deal with, the things of being human. You know, I can't help but think He understands what it's like to have a splinter in your skin. We know that he was tempted. We know that he was hungry. And we'll look at some of these things in greater detail in a few moments. But I think we oftentimes overlook those things. We forget that we gloss over. We don't give them the credit. We don't give him the credit that is due, that what he suffered for us and what it allows him to do is relate to us. He understands because he shared the same. In Hebrews chapter 2 and verses 14 through 18, we realize that God himself is unseen. We even mentioned that in Bible class this morning, that God is unseen. We cannot experience him with our senses. And what I mean with that is touch, feel, a hug, an embrace, to physically talk to face. And I apologize for not them popping up all at once for whatever reason. The type that I used, the animations were not working correctly. I tried to fix it in the back, but finally just left it alone. We cannot converse with him like we do a friend. We cannot relate to him as we would a human person, is what I am trying to say. This sometimes leads us, and this goes back to what I have heard people say, leads us to feel that God is distant, remote, and removed from our daily lives, our needs, and our concerns. I have heard Christians make similar statements. I think there's a whole lot deeper problem when those things are said and when those things are thought. But we need to examine ourselves and make sure that that is not the case. But also what we can see from Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 through 18, partaken of flesh and blood. He took on the human experience. We know that he bled. We know that he died. We know that he was born. We know that he grew. In all things, make like his brethren. He did not abandon deity. He was still deity. But he did become fully human. And sometimes I think that people have a problem understanding that he shared in the same things. He himself shared in the same. And we see that there in Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 14. Again, thinking along with that, Jesus came to earth. What did that do? That made the unseen God visible. Jesus coming to earth took away any distance between the Creator and his creation. It caused God to experience humanity, and he felt what we feel. I think that's very important for us to remember in our relationship with Christ and going back to our prayers. He felt what we feel. He understands. He knows. And he cares. So let's look at a few things in detail. In Matthew chapter 4 and verse 2, we see, and after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. I myself can't imagine how hungry I would be after 40 days and 40 nights. I know that after about 4 hours, I'm hungry. But he gets it. He understands the physical aspect of being hungry. And if you think about 40 days and 40 nights without eating, I'm sure that he's weak. I'm sure that he probably has had some dizzy spells. You know, when we start thinking about that physical aspect, the definition of hungry is feeling or displaying the need for food. That's the literal meaning. But when we think about this passage here, it's the craving of physical needs. This shows here in this passage that Christ was fully human, that he was hungry. And we also know that after that, he was tempted. We see that 40 days, 40 nights, he's hungry, and what happens? The devil tempts him then at his low point. But do we really think about that? That Jesus knows what it's like to be human. He understands. And that should give us a comfort, a feeling, a peace that when we go to God in prayer and he is interceding for us, that he knows, he can understand. But I think we overlook that at times. We mentioned John chapter 1 and verse 1 this morning in our Bible class, but it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made. It was not anything made that was made. Think about that for a minute. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him. And without him was not anything made that was made. But yet he experienced humanity. In Matthew chapter 16, verses 9 and 10, do you not yet perceive? Do you not remember the 5 loaves for the 5,000, and how many baskets you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000, and how many baskets you gathered? Why was this done? Why were these thousands of people fed? Because they were hungry. And he knew what it was like to be hungry. So he fed them. Jesus felt what it feels like to be in need. To need things, especially from the physical side. He knew what it was like to be thirsty, to be hungry. We know that he knows what it was like to feel pain. But we also know what it was like when it says Jesus wept. He knows sorrow. He knows heartache, hurt, loss, loneliness. He knows what it's like to lose a friend, to lose a loved one. Weeping is usually, not always, but usually a response to sadness. Sometimes people cry because they're extremely happy. But we feel sorrow when a loved one dies, and Jesus experienced that firsthand. How do we know that? Because the Bible tells us so. John chapter 11, verse 11, it says, after saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. Again in John chapter 11, skipping down to verse 43, when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The man who died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Jesus, the author of life, experienced what it feels like to lose someone we love. So that means when we lose a loved one, when we go to God in prayer, Christ understands. He knows. He cares. And that should give us confidence, peace, and should increase our faith. In Mark chapter 3, beginning in verse 1, we see here that he looked with anger. It says, again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, come here. And he said to them, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill? But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out and immediately held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. There's so much here in these few verses that Jesus experienced. You see, he has people watching him to mess up. You ever worked somewhere and you had a boss watching you, or a coworker watching you, waiting for you to do something wrong? Well, it says here, and they watched him to see whether he would heal them on the Sabbath. They were looking for something. He experienced that. He knew that. But what did he do? He was angry with them for that. He understands the things in which we deal with. We know other times that Jesus was angry. In Matthew 21, Jesus was angry with the money changers there at the temple. But we also know that in Ephesians 4 and verse 26 it says, be angry and sin not. It's okay to be angry. We see that. We see that Christ himself was angry on more than one occasion. He understands what it's like to be angry. We just have to be careful and not sin. But that again should give us comfort and peace and increase our faith that he shared in the same things that we do. We get angry when things are not right. I get frustrated all the time at work because I know how things should be done, and people just don't do it. They want to take shortcuts, or they're just so lazy, I'll do it when I feel like it. And I get real frustrated with things like that. We had something that was due on Friday. It was about an hour and a half PD that they've had actually since July. It was due Friday. You know how many teachers out of 38 did it? 4. I was a little frustrated, a little angry, because I've got to check a box that we had all this PD. It was done. It was taken care of. I have to sign off on it, send it in. I was frustrated. So I had to extend the deadline a week and say, you better get it done. But we also sometimes get angry when we're mistreated or we see bad attitudes. And, I've talked about frustration there. But sometimes that frustration may be with work. It might be with people, with family. It could be even people of the faith, brothers and sisters in Christ. It could be with a brother or sister, parents. In John chapter 2, verse 24, but Jesus, on his part, did not entrust himself to them, because he knew all people, and needed no one to bear witness about man, for he himself knew what was in man. Christ knew. He doesn't need anybody to tell him, because he experienced it. In John chapter 21 and verse 17, he said to him the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. He knows everything. Not just from the deity side, but from the human side. He shared in the same, he experienced humanity. How does he know? Because he lived it. And we best not forget it. But he felt disappointment. Mark chapter 17, beginning in verse 14, and he called the people to him again and said to them, hear me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him, but the things that come out of a person are what defile him. And when he had entered the house and left, the people, his disciples, asked him about the parable. And he said to them, then are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from the outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart, but his stomach, and what is expelled? Thus he declares all foods clean. And he said, what comes out of a person is what defiles him. You see, we feel all the time, in so many ways, disappointment. He asked them, are they without understanding? Do you not understand? So many aspects of our life, we deal with disappointment. Sometimes we deal with disappointment even from within ourselves. Disappointment results from expectations not being met. We expect something to be done, we expect something to happen, maybe even expecting something in return. And when those things don't happen, when those needs are not met, there's disappointment. We expect something different. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 26, and he said to them, why are you afraid, O you of little faith? Then he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was great calm. Do you think he was disappointed here? Why are you afraid? They knew who he was. Why? Because they woke him up. They went and got him. Matthew 14 and 31, Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? Do we fall into that boat sometimes? Matthew 16 and verse 8, but Jesus was aware of this, said, O you of little faith, why are you discussing among yourselves the fact that you have no bread? Why do we sometimes lack faith? He experienced this. He experienced disappointment. But why do we lack faith at times? We've all felt disappointment. Jesus, the master teacher, felt discouragement of disappointing results. You work so hard for something, and then it doesn't turn out the way you want it to. But he also knows that they all forsook him. Matthew chapter 14, beginning in verse 8. And Jesus said to them, have you come out against a robber with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I was with you in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me. But let the scriptures be fulfilled. And they all left him and fled. Abandonment at the time of need. Rejection after the investment of affection is devastating. In John chapter 6 and verse 66, after this many of his disciples turned back and no longer walked with him. Matthew 26 and verse 21, and as they were eating, he said, truly I say to you, one of you will betray me. We've all probably felt betrayed at some time or another. All of us are probably old enough in here to have experienced some type of betrayal. Jesus was betrayed to the point of death. Zechariah chapter 13 and verse 7. Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who stands next to me, declares the Lord of hosts. Jesus, the faithful friend, felt the rejection of betrayal and abandonment. He understands. He knows why? Because he experienced human things. He lived it. Hebrews chapter 2, verses 16 through 18, we've read this. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. He is a merciful and faithful high priest. Why? Because he understands. In Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weakness, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. This allows us to approach God. This allows our approach to God. It should give us faith and comfort. He himself suffered being tempted. He understands the struggle of temptation. Why? Because he experienced it firsthand. He lived it. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. Do we seek his aid? Going back to our passage at the beginning in Hebrews chapter 2, do we seek his aid, his help? Do we remember that he is there to help us? We must remember that he shared in the same. If you will, turn your psalm books to 465. As I was sitting working on this sermon, this song popped into my head. And after reading through this and studying it, it kind of had a new light to me. I think because Jesus knows and cares. Because Jesus experienced it. He lived it. The words are, when the road is rough and the way is dim, Jesus knows, Jesus cares. When the darkness comes, we can go to him. Jesus knows, Jesus cares. When the heart is sad over one untrue, Jesus knows. Jesus cares. Go to him in prayer. He will strengthen you. Jesus knows. Jesus cares. When you say goodbye to your dearest friend, Jesus knows. Jesus cares. He will comfort you until life shall end. Jesus knows. Jesus cares. He knows from his throne above. He cares with a perfect love. Go to Jesus for peace. Go to him for rest. Jesus knows. Jesus cares. Does that not give a new light to you after our study this morning? That he knows because he experienced all humanity, the things in which we struggle with every day, and he cares. How do we know he cares? Because he died for us. Let's sing this song in closing this morning, number 465. Jesus knows and cares. When the road is rough and the way is dim, Jesus knows, Jesus cares. When the darkness comes, we can go to him. Jesus knows, Jesus cares. When the heart is sad over what untrue, Jesus knows, Jesus cares. Go to him in prayer, he will comfort you. Jesus knows, Jesus cares. When you say goodbye to your dearest friend, Jesus knows, Jesus cares. He will comfort you until life shall end. Jesus knows, Jesus cares. He knows from his throne above. He cares with a perfect love. Go to Jesus for peace. Go to him for rest. Jesus knows. Jesus cares. Hopefully, our study this morning has been encouraging to you, has been comforting to you, that Jesus knows and he cares. He cares about us so much that he died for us. He experienced all the things in which we experience because he cares. Don't let all of the things in which he dealt with go to waste because you are not right with God or you have not made the choice to be a Christian. What a terrible, terrible thought to not have Christ there understanding for you and ultimately to spend an eternity in hell. If we can help you this morning, please come as we stand and as we sing.